This island was the first ever biome added to Minecraft, and it's just one of dozens of biomes added to the game since 2010. But we'll also see every biome that Mojang removed, like the Sky Dimension or the only nether biome to ever have water. Starting first with the world before biomes, map types. And on January 6, 2010, map settings were added to in-dev, with 4 new types for us to see. Island was the default level type. Really all you'd find here were a couple of hills and a giant ocean that would exist at the border. Much more interesting was floating, which as you can see from this picture does look similar to the floating island types that we would eventually see in the buffet world type settings that we had from 1.13 to 1.17. Just be careful not to fall off of these, because the ground was covered in bedrock and you just die if you fell down. The third type was flat, which conceptually is similar to the super flat world type that we see today. There we had flat grass, flowers, trees, and the starting house, which was the earliest structure ever added to Minecraft. And the fourth of our map types back in in-dev were inland, which was similar to the island variant, but instead of having water at the borders, it just had infinite flatland. On January 7th of 2010, we traded out our islands for hell, since perhaps the earliest precursor to what we'd see in the nether was the hell biome type added in in-dev. Now obviously instead of having a boundary of water, it was replaced with lava, but that wasn't the only thing that made this hellish, considering that there was a lot less light during the day and mobs could spawn at anywhere at all times. And even if you wanted to settle down here, good luck, considering that all of the grass was replaced with dirt and farming was substantially slower in this map type. So that's probably why Notch went and added paradise to the next map theme. Just about a month later, the easiest theme was added into the game. Here, monsters could only spawn underground because the time was always set to noon, and you'd find these large beaches surrounding everywhere you went, and any crops that you planted here would take even less time to grow, only taking 30 minutes. But compared to how fast wheat grows today, with 4 out of 5 wheat crops taking 31 minutes to grow to full. Along with paradise, we saw our first ever forest biome in Minecraft, the woods, which feels a lot closer to normal mode. Instead of being only day or only night, this biome was only overcast, which is why you'd be able to see mushrooms spawning day or only night. This biome was only overcast, which is why you'd be able to see mushrooms spawning around in that low light level, which those make it seem a lot more similar to the kind of roofed forest that we'd see later in the game, but I'm getting ahead of myself, since our next biome would be the Farlands. On March 27th of 2010, we saw our first ever instance of the Farlands, but to call this intentional is far from the truth. See, the whole reason it happens is because the Perlin noise generator that the game uses to generate the height levels for the terrain breaks when it reaches the integer overflow limit. So when you reach 12,550,821 blocks from the world spawn, the integer rolls over and all of the blocks start stretching way up into the sky limit. And then if you were to go over 1 billion blocks away, it becomes the Fartherlands. And the reason we see this more stretched out version of the Farlands is because the selector noise value breaks. And with 2 major parts of the world generation code breaking at this point, the terrain gets really weird. And the Farlands would stay within Minecraft until they were removed in beta 1.8. The first proper biome added to Minecraft, which is to say, something that would actually happen rarely within the world generation, was the winter mode added in alpha, which looks similar to the snowy plains that we'd see later on. And if you were walking around in alpha, you'd find these about 1/4 of the time. There really wasn't much point to go there though, considering that if you wanted something like sugarcane, which was then called reeds, it was extremely rare to find. I mean, all the water was ice, so it would break upon world generation. And then on October 29th of 2010, we saw our first ever version of the Slip, which if you've never heard of it before, it's because it only ever showed up in this PC Gamer and IndieGames.com demo. And it wouldn't be until we'd get it that we actually called it its proper name, the Nether. And the reason it took any of these names is because Notch didn't want to just reuse different religious names for the different world types. And if you've ever wondered the reason why you can travel 8 blocks at a time faster in the Nether than you can in the overworld, it's actually a reference to the Wheel of Time book series. In those books, there's a path called the Ways, which is a dangerous way to travel very far. Notch wanted the same thing for anyone who went and built the portal. Though the most trouble I've ever had with the Nether is trying to get my Nether portal to link the proper way once I'm going back through. Just a day after we first saw the Nether, we got the most biomes ever added in a single day in Minecraft. Though by our standards today, their differences look a little quaint. So let's speedrun through them. We had the Rainforest, which has a 1 in 3 chance of large oak trees as opposed to the regular 1 in 10 like other biomes. The Seasonal Forest, which only had oak trees and was more or less identical to the normal forest. The Normal Forest biome, which because fire spread used to be infinite, it actually caused lava lakes to often burn down our forest quickly. Notch wouldn't nerf it until 2011. The Shrubland, which is one of the smallest biomes in the game at this point. The Taiga, which back in alpha really didn't look that different from a regular forest. They're all made of oak trees. There was no spruce in the game. The Tundra, or what we now know as the Ice Plains, which at the time had most of the passive mobs that we're used to seeing spawning here. But in 1.10 in the Frostburn update, that was then removed. And the reason we'd eventually get igloos added into our Ice Plains is because Mojang wanted a way to show off the new loot table feature that they added in 2015, the Savannah. Though not the Savannah that we're used to, since while it was technically added all the way back in alpha, it'd get removed in beta 1.8, before eventually being re-added in 1.7.2, and then it actually had its distinct trees and colors. And speaking of distinct colors, did you know that in 1.18, the sky color for the savanna was changed, though not by much. The plains. It's funny to think that the plains weren't actually added until this late into the game's development, but before then it was just called classic mode. And when they were first added in, they were really plain, considering that no tall grass spawned here until beta 1.6, and they didn't even have trees until 1.10. It was good for building a base, but not much else. The swampland, which if it doesn't look like the swamps that you're used to, those wouldn't come until beta 1.8. But to show how different these things used to be, snow actually used to generate within the swamplands. In fact, to their core, they were basically shrublands. But what really caught me off guard is that I don't remember them ever being called swampland. And that's because it changed in 1.13, where they were eventually renamed into the swamp. And the drowned used to call these swamps home, considering that prior to 1.14, the drowned mob could spawn within the swamp biome. And to see an even weirder home found in the swamp, we have this home here that spawns a witch hut right at the bottom of a lava ravine. But hey, the witch has fire resistance, I just don't know if that goes to logs. The desert, which originally was just sand and cacti. We didn't even see sandstone generate here until 1.3. And if you ever wonder why we see these floating things as sand in the world generation, it was repurposed from a bug into a feature. The whole reason they have particles falling down from the sand is to hint at cave-ins because they didn't want to have to change the world generation. And originally when sand would fall down to the ground in the first Secret Friday update, they didn't have an animation for falling. As soon as they knew they could fall to the ground, they'd teleport down to it. And the desert wells that we find nowadays, you're a lot more likely to find them on Bedrock than you will in Java. It's a 1 in 500 chance in Bedrock compared to only 1 in 1000 on Java. And since they're not technically a structure, they will still generate if you disable the generate structures feature. Can't even get rid of them if you tried. The frozen desert. These are basically just our tundras, except the grass that we'd see underneath the snow was now just replaced with sand. And while they were added into the code on October 30th of 2010 along with the rest of these biomes, they were never actually properly implemented to generate. Our first biome of 2011 was the sky biome, which was supposed to be the heaven counterpart to the nether. The word supposed seems kind of funny here, considering that Notch didn't actually want to confirm it just yet, but because the PC Gamer article talked about it so much, it was essentially confirmed right then. And the original idea for it was that it would be a dream world where you have to sleep in a bed to get here. There was no sun, it'd all be evenly lit, and there wasn't even dark caves. No rain, no snow, only chickens spawned, and it was also never properly added into the game. But if you used modded clients back in beta 1.6, you could play the prototype. Or if you booted up Minecraft, which was the 2D spin-off that Notch made for Minecraft, it exists here too. And that wasn't the last time we'd hear from the sky biome. We just have to wait until later in the year. On August 18th of 2011, Notch added in rivers to Minecraft, or rather, river biomes, since before they would happen, but it was just a terrain generation quirk. And nowadays, the significance of rivers is that they're going to be the best place for you to find squids, because ever since 1.13.1, they could only spawn in rivers or our ocean biomes. They lost the ability to spawn anywhere else. Also in the mix is the Extreme Hills, which is a name that Mojang's never seemed quite comfortable with, because while it was added here in 2011, it would then be changed to mountains in 1.13, only to then go back to Extreme Hills in the 1.18 snapshots. But it wasn't done yet, since then it would go to mountains some weeks later, and finally end up on windswept hills. And it seems they weren't the only ones confused, considering that goats would actually spawn here in these Extreme Hills biomes before they got their proper mountains to spawn on. While oceans existed before this point, they now were marked as a proper biome, since originally it would spawn with an infinite ocean as the border back around the map in Classic. And in early versions of Minecraft, it definitely still felt like that infinite ocean still existed. If you're unlucky enough to spawn on a survival island, you'd probably just reload the seed until you got somewhere else. And in beta 1.8, the ocean levels decreased slightly, only going down from 64 blocks to 63, now giving us the sea level that we're familiar with today. And just a few weeks later in September, we got a whole new batch of biomes added in, first giving us the Mushroom Island, which we now call the Mushroom Fields, which when our oceans shrunk in 1.7.2, the Mushroom Islands got a lot rarer because of it. I mean, it's hard to be an island if there's not a lot of ocean. But that didn't stop these Mushroom Fields biomes from generating, since there used to be a glitch where they could combine with other biomes, giving us these weird landlocked mushroom fields. And while that really doesn't happen anymore, they did seem to bring some of the land over with them, since as of 1.21.9, you can now find pumpkin patches generating our mushroom fields, which is nice, but it's nowhere near as cool as these villages that spawn in the Mushroom Fields biome. And on that same day, September 22nd, 2011, we got the Frozen Ocean biome, which at first really wasn't all that special. There was just an ocean with a big sheet of a layer of ice. But on Bedrock, these frozen oceans can be a lot more interesting, since prior to 1.18, icebergs used to be able to generate right next to deserts and badlands. But on Java, this wasn't really possible, considering there they had a regular ocean border that would prevent this from happening. At the start of 2012, we first got the Wooded Hills, which these wooded hill biomes would eventually get a lot more wooded. But it wouldn't be until this bug was fixed, because originally, large oaks that generated in between 1.7.2 to 1.9 would cause too many performance issues that it didn't happen. But that was fixed in snapshot 15W44A by Spooner. The Taiga Hills biome is just a variant of the taiga, but on Java, they're not very exciting, considering that villages nor pillager outposts could generate here. January 5th also brought the Mountain Edge, which never generated in Bedrock Edition, and this was also the update where we saw beaches finally get added as a proper proper biome. Though in beta 1.8, they were sort of removed, considering that in that update, they removed sand and gravel from the beaches, and they wouldn't be added back in until 1.1. And if you look at this seed in 1.16.2, we can see that a beach formed an ocean right into the shape of a heart in the surface. Pretty wild what a couple random lines of code can do. On January 18th of 2012, we got the jungle biome added to Minecraft, which for a time were extremely rare after a change made in 1.7.2, but that would then be fixed in 1.18. However, if you go fishing in this biome in Bedrock, it's possible to go and find cocoa beans in here, which is maybe because of balancing, considering that there are less large jungle trees that generate in Bedrock Edition than that do in Java. We wouldn't get another new biome until August 2nd of 2013, over a year and a half after. And what was the first one added? The Disco Mountains. Or at least that's what Jeb originally called them, before then giving them the name the Mesa and eventually changing it to the Badlands that we know today. And what always weirds me out is that these predated red sand. It just feels cursed to see, but not as cursed as this bug, which caused the entire Mesa to generate completely missing, which almost makes it feel like you have X-ray. But if you don't, then here's a minor tip, because only in the Mesa biomes does gold ore generate up to Y255, as opposed to Y level 32 where it spawns in the rest of the world. And another big biome for the update that changed the world was the Mega Taiga, which when it was first teased, some players thought would be the Redwood Forest, but now we just call them Old Growth Taiga, giving us both a spruce and pine variant. And because of the way that the code is specifically for the pine taiga, they're all the more likely to have a lush cave generate beneath them. This is due to the game's internal humidity value, which when it's high gives us lush caves. 2 days after our old growth, we saw ourselves get the Stony Beach, which we now know as the Stony Shore. And on Bedrock Edition, you can actually find a bug that causes buried treasure to generate here, even causing buried treasure above sea level at Y level 90. And then that next month in September, we got the Roofed Forest, which I can't believe was called that until it was renamed to the Dark Forest in 1.13. I mean, it's called Dark Oak, I just always figured that was the name for it. And while this is the biome where you can find yourself woodland mansions, it's also where we can see these weird glitches show up that cause woodland mansions to generate with these extremely long basements. I mean, I get it, if you're gonna build yourself a house, why not make it a penthouse? The same day we got the Dark Forest, we also got the Birch Forest, which a few years later in 1.16.2 had this famous bug that caused the birch trees to generate in a weird pattern, only spawning the trees at the northwest corner of the chunk, and also giving the perfect setup for a creepypasta. So thankfully they fixed this and removed Herobrine in the next update. On a cheerier note, we got the Sunflower Plains, which is still the only place where sunflowers can generate naturally in the game. And also on September 5th of 2013, we got new versions for the Extreme Hills biome, those being Extreme Hills Plus, which we now call the Windswept Forest, which got a lot more annoying to travel in 1.7.2, because that caused infested stone to generate here. And the other one was the Extreme Hills Mutated biome, now called the Windswept Gravelly Hills, which to this day is one of the rarest biomes found in the overworld, only covering 0.103% of the world's terrain. Before these were called the Eroded Badlands, we knew them as the Mesa Bryce, and it's because of that erosion that we could find the deep dark spawning here. But at the same time, the humidity values mean it's impossible for a lush cave to generate. The deep ocean was, you guessed it, the ocean biome but deeper, and while it was originally only 10 blocks deeper, it's now been made to be twice as deep as the regular ocean. And on Bedrock, you can only find salmon spawning here. Yeah, they don't offer a lot, but there is more seagrass than other oceans, at least tall seagrass, which would be cool if turtles spawn there. When the Snowless Taiga was added in 2013, it did stand out from the original Taiga because those used to generate with snow. But now the default doesn't have any snow, and the snowy version of the Taiga was made rare in 1.7.2. And speaking of snow, here are the Ice Plain Spikes, which prior to the update Aquatic was the only source of packed ice naturally. And then in 1.10 in the Frostburn update, Mojang changed it so that most passive mobs were no longer able to spawn here. But even though our pigs and cows can't, lava lakes and ruined portals still can. And on seeds like this, we can see weirdly generating extremely tall versions of the ice spikes, caused by a floating piece of terrain messing up the generation. On April 24th of 2014, Mojang added the End. Now the game had the End dimension for sure, but it wasn't actually called the End biome until this point, where they reworked it from the Sky dimension. And originally players thought it would be called the Ender instead of the End because of the dragon's name. And in the concept phase, the original design for Endstone was meant to be a white cobblestone texture, making this a lot more fitting as the heaven counterpart to the Nether. On July 10th of 2014, we saw the first instance pop up at the Bedrock Farlands, otherwise known as the Sky Grid, because of how it looks similar to the famous Minecraft map. And the way to find this would be traveling out too far in the Z-axis, since going too far in the X-axis just caused nothingness. You'd see structures generate, but no other terrain. You'd have to go the other way for the Sky Grid. The only biome added in 2015 was the Void, which despite its name, it is still possible for certain types of mobs to spawn here, but the way it happens is a little weird. So mobs like phantoms could spawn here, but that's because their spawning relies on things outside of the normal spawning rules. So if you didn't sleep, it doesn't matter if you're in the Void, they're still gonna catch you. 3 years would go by until we get another set of biomes. But when we did, they came in the version of 4 separate ones, the End Outer Islands. And here we got the Floating Islands, the Medium Island, High Island, which is the only biome in the end where both the chorus trees and the end 10 cities can generate, and the barren island, which is a whole lot of not much. And later that February, we got the warm ocean biome added in, as well as the deep warm ocean biome as well, which while the coral reef might seem to have a lot of different life, strangely, kelp does not generate here. And back in snapshot 21W06A, there existed a strange bug that could cause our coral reef to generate on top of stone floors. And later in the snapshots for 1.17, we got an even more unwelcome change, with the drowned now being able to spawn in these warm ocean biomes as well. And as a gradient into those warm ocean biomes, we got the lukewarm ocean biomes, which the only thing notable about them is that they can spawn any aquatic mob in the game, which extends to guardians as well, considering that ocean monuments can generate in any deep ocean biome. And for the cold ocean biomes, they not only don't generate tropical fish or pufferfish, but they also give us less seagrass, just overall making it a boring place to be. And the last of our oceans was the deep frozen ocean biome, which was originally called the frozen deep ocean biome before it was changed in snapshot 18W19A. And later in 2018, Mojang gave us a more interesting development on the surface, bamboo jungles, which you can only find a jungle pyramid in a bamboo jungle on Java Edition. They don't generate like this on Bedrock. Oh, and also we found this during research, and there's no other place to really mention it, but I like this wallpaper of Zuri chopping down the bamboo jungle. The panda's losing its home and it's still unfazed. With 2020, we got the new nether biomes, starting with the Soul Sand Valleys, which when the skeletons were first added to Soul Sand Valleys to spawn, they didn't really spawn that much. For comparison, they only spawn about 1/10 as often as they do now, which would have been a lot less annoying. And if you look at the official artwork for the nether update, you can see that there's a wither skeleton that spawned inside of the Soul Sand Valley, but in game, they don't spawn there. And here was an early development screenshot that Mojang shared off when they were first making the Soul Sand Valley, which looks a lot more similar to the birch forest we saw earlier than anything meant to be in the game. It's also brought along the Crimson Forest, which the Minecraft artist Jasper confirmed was thought of all the way back during the update Aquatic, which back in its early development, it was originally called the Netherwort Forest. And most of the ambient sounds that you hear while you're walking around here, like this, made using balloons, which is weird, but not as weird as this official site, which if you were to make a world prior to 1.18 and make it a single biome of a Crimson Forest, it could generate water inside of the biome, giving us the strangest survival challenge yet. And because the Crimson Forests were originally called the Netherwort Forests, it makes sense the Warped Forests were also called the Blue Netherwort Forest as well. And the sound effects that you're going to hear here for the ambiance are actually made from an Enderman screaming, slowed down, and reversed. And of all of the 5 biomes in the Nether, the Warped Forest is still the rarest, only making up about 8% of the Nether by volume. With April Fool's update of 2020, Mojang added more than a couple of biomes to the game as well, like Between, which was the same as the Fleet dimension where we got all these different end ships, but it would generate with a stony terrain instead of the void, and still no elytra in sight. There's the biome for the player with no time for nonsense, which you would find if you loaded up the Busy dimension in the book, and here full mineral blocks and redstone components generate instead of our ores, meaning the most time you waste is trying to say the name of the biome. And the oddest sight of them all was the Shapes biome, a biome where no mobs can spawn, and these shapes can generate anywhere, even underground. On April 8th of 2020, we'd get a late addition to the Nether biomes with the Basalt Delta, which if you ever died here, you have this snapshot to thank for it, which made lava lakes more common in the Basalt Deltas. But a stranger snapshot still is that in 21W41A, the color for water fog in this biome changed, but water doesn't exist in the Nether. And while that sounds like an Easter egg, it might be, but it's not this Easter egg. So this is confirmed by the tech lead for Minecraft Bedrock Edition gameplay. They hid an extremely obscure Easter egg or reference to the Basalt Deltas. And as of February 28th, 2022, no one's found it. And considering I haven't seen any mention since, it seems like it's still unclaimed. So maybe one of you knows what we're looking for. On July 8th of 2020, we didn't just get one biome, but the ability to make them all. Since now with data packs, we can define our own rules for custom biomes, giving us sites like this, the Village biome, which at this point you can't really call it a village. It looks more like the suburbs. What does this biome look like to you? It's not a plains biome, but instead, this is the result from generating a single biome dripstone cave world. At least what would happen if you generated one of these single biome only worlds before 1.18. And then if you looked underneath, it was all dripstone caves from there. And for exactly one snapshot during the development of Caves and Cliffs, zombies weren't able to spawn here, but that would then be fixed in snapshot 21W40. March 10th, 2021, the Lush Cave, which was first added in 1.17, but it was only accessible with the buffet world generation setting. And that's not the only limitation we've seen for the world generation, because also in the code, it's made so that players cannot spawn in a Lush Cave during the world spawn. But while we can't live there, the villagers certainly can, as we can see from this seed, which caused a village's generation to overlap with a nearby exposed Lush Cave. And a few months after, we'd see the meadows come to the game. And when they were first added in, they originally used to spawn with blue orchids. But ever since experimental snapshot 2, they can no longer generate here. Well, that hasn't seemed to slow the meadows down any, considering that they're the most common mountain biome you can find, covering 1.19% of the overworld surface. And because of this, it makes sense that they're the only mountain biome where villagers can generate. When the Grove was first added into the game, the powder snow blocks that came with it were originally covered up by snow blocks, which makes it a lot safer. But this was deemed a bug and therefore fixed. And on the same same day, we saw the snowy slopes added, which is basically just the grove without trees. But it is the only mountain biome where an igloo can generate. What we now know as jagged peaks were originally called lofty peaks when they were added on July 13th. And it's because of those lofty heights that the pillager outposts are the only structures that can generate here, but when they do, they can also sometimes generate with extra tall cobblestone foundations, even beating out how tall our mansions can be sometimes. And only on Bedrock Edition are you able to find rabbits and polar bears here as well. These are the frozen peaks, originally called snow-capped peaks, and maybe they still should be, because despite being called frozen peak, this biome doesn't spawn any strays like the tundras do, at least on Java. On Bedrock they do spawn the strays, but in Java it's just normal skeletons. And the only way to get a stray here was to convert one with powdered snow. After all those mountain updates on one day, it seems weird that the stony peaks would come so much later on August 10th. But the whole reason these were added was because snowy mountain biomes would sometimes generate directly next to hot biomes in early caves and cliffs. So this was added as a middle ground. And because they only exist as a gradient, they make up the third rarest overworld biome, and the rarest mountain biome, only 0.1% of the overworld. In the Deep Dark experimental snapshot, we unsurprisingly got the Deep Dark added in February 17th of 2022, which as Mojang mentioned in this video, was originally supposed to feel like an underwater biome with the water missing, having things like floating jellyfish in the air and ghostly looking blocks. And while King B-Dog showed off originally developing these with fossils covered in skulk veins, those unfortunately never made it into the game. And on the much brighter side of 1.19 was the mangrove swamps, added on April 6th of 2022, which still have weird disparities between Java and Bedrock Minecraft. Like in Java only, you can find bogged mobs spawning within the caves here, and on Bedrock we see less of the trees generate than they do on Java. They're also one of the few biomes that can generate fossils underground, others including deserts and regular swamps. The flagship biome of 2023 was the Cherry Grove, and despite what any YouTube thumbnails might try to lead you to believe, no villages can spawn here, so there's also no cherry villager. But weirdly enough, pillager outposts can. I mean, I like the pink too, I guess I can't judge. And if you also like pink petals, then you should know that on Java, you can actually get more by bone mealing the grass blocks. For the 2023 April Fool's joke, we got the moon biome, which you could arrive on the moon as soon as you flew up over Y level 700. And as expected, you could jump a lot higher on the moon because of its weak gravitational pull. But be careful where you jump, because at certain heights, if you jump too high, you can actually get pulled back to the earth if you jump above Y level 117. And fitting with the joke, if you break up the floor, you find out that the moon is made of cheese. And if you were to suffocate on the moon because the respiration nor water breathing potions can save you, you'll get the rare death message, skip the tutorial, experience the dark side of the moon. Another April Fool's update we saw gave us plenty of new biomes in the poisonous potato dimension for the April Fool's joke of 2024, the Arboretum, which you could call the forest of this dimension, but it looks a lot more like a player-made forest, considering that the trees can generate very closely to each other, even with no gap between the trunks, which is impossible unless you're bone mealing saplings in the overworld. And unlike other forests, there's not just one singular foliage color here. I mean, you can have one tree with multiple different colors of leaves, which I think would be really cool if Mojang ever wanted to give us some kind of autumn biome. They do like to test out features in April Fool's jokes. The next biome is the Corruption, which despite its name is actually a lot more similar to a regular forest biome, but the translation in-game is actually misspelled, spelled as Curruption with a U. We got the Fields biome, which has all these different farmlands, and as such, lanterns can generate here to light it up. The Hash biome, which is made like a desert, but the most standout part is these vicious potatoes that randomly spawn, which will shoot up projectiles that attack all living things, basically like a mini wither. And finally, we'd see the Wasteland biome in the poisonous potatoes, which if you're wondering why the water glows, it's actually because these water blocks are waterlogged light blocks. But I wouldn't go near it, because all water in the Wasteland, either naturally generated or placed by the player, is always going to be poisonous. And if it rains here, it has the same effect. It's just acid rain. And the most recent biome ever added to Minecraft is the Pale Garden on October 2nd of 2024, which is unique because it doesn't have ambient music. And if you're listening to a music track when you enter into the biome, it fades into silence, only resuming when you exit, which makes this biome scary, but it might be nice to know that since naturally generated pale oaks only have a 20% chance to include a creaking heart, it is technically possible to have pale gardens with zero creakings to be seen. And for how rare these biomes were initially when they spawned, that made resin hunting a lot more annoying. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?